Hey guys, thanks for coming. My past life was as a conference organizer like Tom, so these organized presentations are a little new to me. But thanks so much for coming to my talk on all choice, no consequence, how to efficiently branch your game's narrative. You are probably sitting in the audience because you have realized, like so much of us, that interactive narrative is super in right now. We are seeing it on the top grossing charts of the iOS store in a lot of interactive story games, like the game I work for, Episode Interactive, as well as some of Telltale's hit titles, Inkle, and that new, what is that little space traveler one? I didn't put it on my slide. We're also seeing it in adventure games. Adventure games used to be very linear, but we're starting to see dialogue branches happening where you can start to own the character a little bit more and customize how they respond to prompts. Things like Broken Age and Kentucky Route Zero are some example of those. And you're even seeing it in AAA titles. Fallout 4, Mass Effect, and Shadow of Mordor got a lot of buzz for how much agency they gave their players and how much they allowed them to customize their narratives. But there's a giant question of, is it worth it? Liam is giving a talk tomorrow. I've learned you should check it out. It's on branching narrative. He'll have a lot of data to back up what I'm about to say, so you should go see it. But in general, when you think about it, you're trying to write hundreds of different storylines with thousands of different character interactions, millions of different lines of dialogue, and if you're trying to do it that way, you're actually wrong. That is the wrong approach to writing interactive fiction. It'll get you really lost in your script, it'll get you really muddied, and it'll probably get you to miss all of your budgets and all of your deadlines. So my hope is to teach you how to design your choices smartly. So we do know, and I agree, and the data shows, that having choice matters in your game. It improves your retention, it makes your game more fun, and it makes your players happier. Those choices, most importantly, have to feel impactful to the players. They have to feel like they make a difference. The data shows that having choices that are actually impactful to your storyline, not really a big deal, and tends to be a waste of really valuable time and money when your game is being developed. So I'm hoping to help you design your choices a little more smartly. So why am I standing here? Who am I? Why does GDC want me at giving this talk? So I'm Cass Phillipps. I'm a creative manager at Episode Interactive. That is a platform for mobile interactive animated stories. We empower our players to create these stories. So we have over 13,000 stories live on our app. We have over 3.5 million weekly active users. Over 1.5 billion episodes have been played, and we are regularly a top grossing iOS app. Mostly what this means is that we have a lot of data on what branching is, on what choices work, on what choices don't, on how to do that retention. And we've made a lot of stories internally, so I'm going to hope to share with you guys some tips and tricks we've learned along the way. For example, here's a choice example. I have a really long narrative. It won't change that much, but I have set some information in it that you may or may not be interested in. So I'm presenting with you a choice on how you'd like to see the information and what is most important to you. It won't drastically change your story, but it'll change how the presentation flows a little bit. So a quick show of hands. You can learn more about Episode in our data. You can learn more about how I execute branches, or you can have me avoid engaging with you. Show of hands. Who is most interested in Episode in our data? Just a few, great. Who is most interested in how to execute on these branches? Done more, I guess. Good, I didn't like the data anyway. Who wants me to stop asking you questions? Great, I'm going to keep asking questions. But I don't have that many, don't worry. So I'm going to skip these slides. Okay. We'll come back to them if there's time. You can ask questions. So I break branching our stories into 4 very distinct parts that barely ever cross. There are the choices, there is the dialogue, there is the story, and there are the branches. I do separate branches and branches from just choices. Quick show of hands, another classic choice example. I'm the NPC. I'm asking you, the player character, your opinion. It's not going to change how I respond, but it allows you to have, be friends or enemies with me. 1 for choices, 2 for dialogue, 3 for story, 4 for branches. What is most important to the success of your interactive fiction game? Show of hands. 1 for choice, 2 for dialogue, 3 for a story, 4 for branches. There's a pretty good mix, so I'm actually kind of surprised there's a pretty good mix, because I think there's a right answer, and I think the right answer is story. So any of you said 3, that's what I think the right answer is. That's what our data suggests. Yes, that I'll show later. So always start with your story. That is the first step to creating the narrative of your game. It is the most important part. It will define how players are reacting. This is not a story talk, so I have 1 quick slide on it. Go to some great story talks given by somebody else. Most importantly, your story needs to be impactful. It needs to be meaningful. It needs to have a great theme. This is not a time to be distracting yourself with branches and choices. They will just muddy your process. Every time that we start discussing branches in our outline phase or our story room, we get lost, we lose where our act breaks are, and our beats start to get really, really muddied. This is a phase to just create a really great outline. An outline should be read by strangers, and they feel engaged, they feel interested, they can follow it, but they may still have a few questions, which is a great place for your outline to be in when you move to branches, which are definitely the most fun. So something to keep in mind with branches, a lot of data, Liam will show you some of this tomorrow, shows that your players are not replaying your game that often. You should not design for replays. You should design for their very first experience to be fun. We've also noticed in our data on that episode that branching doesn't actually affect replayability all that much. I don't have specific numbers, but here's a nice little graph. If we take the pink one, that's a story called The Ember Effect. That is about our average replayability. The Ember Effect has no branches at all. Has some little tiny choices. We compare it to Finding Mr. Right. Finding Mr. Right is a story we produced that is 15 episodes long. It's about 150 minutes of gameplay. Very easy to replay. It has 4 major storylines running through it that you can interact with. It has 12 different endings. It has hundreds, if not thousands, of choices in it. We advertise all of this up front, and it is replayed slightly above average. Take a great story. Super Secret Cedar Hill is an example of that. A lot of our recent originals are examples where we brought it into a story room. We really workshopped the story. It has no branching whatsoever, and it's getting a little above massive branching. If you look at Tangled Love, that is our most replayed story, it also has no branching until the very end, where a single choice gives you 4 different endings. What it does do really well is a number of small choices. They're all about relationship building and just about feeling like I am responding to the characters around me, and they are reacting in very small ways to me. And we think that that is leading to a lot of its replayability. So on that note, branches, still really fun, still really cool. We do put them in our game. First of all, what is a major branch, just so we know the difference between a good branch and a bad branch. So a major branch is something that's probably a change in many scenes or characters due to the choice that those players made. Usually it's going to be a unique way to reach the same goal. Again, you have those goals on your outline, those beats through it. It's going to be different ways that you get to them. It's probably strong enough that it is memorable and you can reference it periodically to the story and the player is not left scratching their head like, when did I make that choice? What is that about? And as a reminder, it is not a completely disconnected storyline. You always want to bring these back to your major story. Some examples out in the industry so you can stay aware of it. In Demi Lovato, which was the game I worked on and that I creatively led, who you date is a pretty major branch. It will show you different scenes. Your dates will be different. How that character reacts to you will change. But the main story is going to be the same. Who you save in episode 2 of The Walking Dead is a great example of this. It'll change all of your character interactions with that character in the next scenes, but in the end, doesn't change the story. And then in Inkle's Sorcery, for example, where you actually go on the map will change the scenes that you see, but the basic goals will stay the same. So how do you find branches? That's obviously what you're here for. How can you find them really, really quickly? One of the major ones that we look at is our story room disagreements. If you guys don't have story rooms, I suggest you get them, but if you still aren't going to have story rooms, it's when you're ever discussing the outline with someone and there's a pretty big disagreement about how something goes. What happens with us is the story lead or the writer takes point, they make a decision, and they move on, because now is not the time for branches, but they put a little note in the margin, add a branch here. An example of this is when we were writing our Mean Girls story with Paramount, the love interest, Micah. We had a disagreement in the story room whether you should kiss him or not. If you kiss him too early, it felt like the chase went away. I already won the dating game. I don't need to pursue. But also, if I kiss him, it ups the stakes of the relationships. It makes it more serious. We moved forward with not kissing him, but we went back later, added a kiss, changed a number of scenes after that. But like any rom-com, you end up having some big fight over some big disagreement, and the kiss is irrelevant. So look for story room disagreements. 2, again, that outline has key beats on it. They're probably each giving you a piece of information, and they're progressing the story in an interesting way, I hope. See if you can reorder those. There was a great example of this in Telltale's The Wolf Among Us, where you could choose to go to Prince Charming's house first or Mr. Toad's house first. They set up very clear consequences right up front, which is an important thing I'll touch on later, to say that if you went to one of these places first, you would miss out on something happening at the other one. But in the end, you'll go to both. You'll get the same key story informations, but you'll feel like you have changed one of those characters' lives just a little bit. So your outline is maintained, but you have a nice little branch where the players felt like they could customize it. And finally, looking at that outline, look at each major goal that you've set up in the outline and figure out how to answer the how question that is between goal A and goal B, or conflict A and conflict B. That's why you keep that outline a little bit loose. An example of this in one of our stories on episode, My Brother's Best Friend, you must have a fight with your parents. It is part of the story. It also must be about your eating disorder, it is a story about an eating disorder. How you have that fight and what triggers it is up to the players and the choices that they make. So we've seeded it with a couple of choices. We have a few big branches on exactly what triggers this fight, but the fight happens no matter what. So this was a great moment where we could just kind of adjust the how to create more player agency. We have found that generally getting one branch in as soon as possible is important. We have one within 12 lines of dialogue in Demi Lovato, because this shows your players that their choices are going to matter with everything they do. It's going to drastically change the story, even if it doesn't. But it plants that seed in their head. We then put a major branch in roughly every 20 to 30 minutes of gameplay. That seems to be about industry norm when I look at Mass Effect and Telltale games. I don't have great data to tell you that that's right, but it kind of feels good. For us, that's about every 2 to 3 episodes. And in the Telltale games, if you play it, you'll notice there's 1 to 2 per episode. As a reminder, this is the branch stage. It is not the choice stage, which in my mind are very distinct things. Branches are the things that you must outline before you write them. Do not get bogged down in your choices at this moment. It's, again, just going to get you lost in the weeds. You don't even have your dialogue yet. You're not positive how a scene is going to flow. Don't worry about choices right now. You've just got an outline, and you've got some great branches. So you outline those branches. You make sure they work. They stick to your core story. You get your writer back on it. And you write a great script, because now you're ready for some scripts. Again, it's not a story talk, it's a branching talk, so just one slide. Some things to keep in mind when you're doing dialogue in games. Make sure you have very unique character voices. I should be able to read a line of dialogue and know exactly who said it. Make sure each line of dialogue has a very succinct and clear reason to be there, especially on mobile. Attention spans are very short. Make sure you have set up very clear consequences and goals with each line of dialogue. I've noticed in gaming that sometimes we need to be a little bit more on the nose with what we're trying to get our players to read. And make sure you're obviously discussing regularly with your design team. How you write a script for a AAA first-person shooter is going to be very different than how you write a script for an adventure game. So finally, the fun part, choices. It's my favorite. A quick bit of data here. This is one of our stories that was fine, so we were willing to kind of rip it apart and play with it. We tested a version for very first-time players that had no choices in it whatsoever. Big surprise, retention was down. This is a retention chart for the story. So no choices, bad. The other 2 lines, however, are us putting in 10 choices that we worked kind of hard on, and 20 choices that we did in the same amount of time. So just kind of got in choices wherever we could see them and make them fit. You'll notice immediately that retention doesn't really change. I don't have a sweet spot for you for exactly how many choices you need. For us, we found that about a choice per page of dialogue or about a choice per minute to minute and a half of interactivity seems to feel fun in playtests. But the main takeaway here is to make a few great choices, not 100 mediocre ones. So where can you find those choices really, really quickly so you get that game out the door? Number 1, for me, a really huge cheat. I do a Control F through my entire script for the question mark. Every question mark in your script is probably an NPC character asking your character a question. That is a choice. I then look at the line of dialogue I've given that, and I think of 2 to 3 other great lines of dialogue that could be there instead. 2 really easy ones. Any place that you can change artwork, allow your players to design that artwork. We have them design outfits in our game. We have them design avatar creators. We even have them design boyfriends, girlfriends, best friends. We're having them start designing cars they want to be driving in the background, anything that just allows them to change art, but not affect your story. And 3, a little, not predictably, unavoidable consequences. Unavoidable consequences tend to not be fun. It's where the game seems to be punishing you for maybe not being in control of a situation, but you have a story, so negative things have to happen. We found that burying this in choices is a great kind of response to it. For example, in the Demi game, there's a moment where your sister has to get angry at you on television. The point of the game is to balance fame and family and love and health. So you were so focused on fame for so long that your family fell to the wayside. Obviously, players were upset when they got to this because they're like, yo, I never had a chance to actually interact with my sister, so it's not really fair that she got mad at me. You guys didn't make that an option. So we went through and we seeded a bunch of scenes that already existed with small questions and choices that allowed you to choose your family over that moment, and then wrote a couple very small interactions that were pretty minimal just to give you those choices. If you ever didn't choose family in that moment, your sister could now reference it when she was on the television show. And if you always chose family, now your friends around you could back you up, and we had some interesting character conflict. Suddenly, the player distaste at the scene pretty much went away. But on that note, it isn't important that any choice you add feels like it matters. So here's some really quick ways to test and make sure your choice feels meaningful. First of all, make sure you're keeping track of character scores. Always add a positive anytime you have a negative. And then if you're going to reference that score later, which I suggest you do, just change a single line of dialogue. So usually, I think Inkel's actually really great with this. You'll notice that when they start a new conversation with a character, or if it's been a while since you interacted with them, you'll notice that they'll have a line of dialogue like, "He turns to you with a grimace and sneers as he says." And then they'll have a separate one that's like, "He looks at you grinning and replies." And all the rest of it is going to be identical, but you're now going to read a new tone into it, and it's going to feel like he's responding to the choices you've made. Always react immediately. I apparently didn't turn my calendar notifications off. That's super professional. Always react to it immediately. So essentially, Telltale does the so-and-so will remember this. I like to be a little more direct, have a player, another NPC, immediately react to the choice with something very unique to the choice, and then move on. Seriously, like 1 to 3 lines, totally fine. Make sure, again, you set up those consequences up front. A choice is much more interesting if when I'm looking at it, I feel like both of those things are different, and both of those things I will gain something and lose something. Examples of this are if you can create any moment where someone has split allegiances, if there are multiple events that you could be attending, or if you have conflicting goals at that moment. And finally, make sure all of your options have very equal weight. One is not more or less interesting than another. Examples, do not use yes, no, and maybe. If your choice says yes, no, and maybe, it's a terrible choice. It usually should have 3 options. If you only have 2, it probably means you had a great line of dialogue there, you thought of a kind of half-assed one, and then you moved on. Force yourself to think of a couple of options, and if you can't, it's probably not a good choice. I also personally like to avoid right and wrong. Our players, at least on episode, don't seem to enjoy when they are wrong. They feel like the game made them wrong. That's up to you. Feel out your players, but I like to just try to make them all fun. So here's a really common choice we see in our game. Your crush is talking with your revengeful ex-boyfriend. Do you want to eavesdrop? Show of hands. Who wants to eavesdrop? Who does not want to eavesdrop? It's roughly our breakdown. About 85% of people pick yes. We think it's because eavesdropping feels like it could be bad. That's why people think it's a good choice. But really, you just want information and you want to move the game forward. So we've changed it up here. We've given the options equal weight. You could text your ex asking for details, butt into the conversation, or cause a scene down the hall. Quick show of hands, who texts their ex? And then maybe this isn't a great choice. Who butts into the conversation? And who causes a scene down the hall? Okay, it's a little better, though. I won't make you pick on this one. You can also establish clear consequences up front. This is a little on the nose, but your crush is talking to your revengeful ex-boyfriend, but your class is about to start. If you relate to English once more, she'll flunk you. What do? Example that I've set up clear consequences. These choices each have a problem. Oh my gosh, I'm going to run out of time. 3 quick bad choices that you want to avoid. False choices. These are choices where I make a choice and my character immediately negates it. The world can negate it. It can put consequences on you that make your choice unable to be executed on. But if I say, I want to keep the journal, or I want to return the journal to someone, and then my character starts reading it and is like, ooh, this is really juicy, I'm going to keep it. Obviously a bad choice. Character must reflect player. Misleading choices. I have a really bad habit of these. In that Demi moment when your sister called, one of our options to respond to her with was, I deserve this. Our players thought it meant, I deserve you getting angry at me and I'm sorry. But when they selected it, the character said, I deserve my fame and you need to get out of my face. Obviously, that led to some player discomfort and unhappiness, and we had to go in and make that choice a little more clear. So just have outside people reading your choices and make sure they're very understandable. And finally, vague choices. I haven't gotten too far in Fallout 4, but I've heard that every now and then they have a problem with this. These are choices where you're actually not sure what it means. You read it and it says something like, disagree. And you're like, disagree with the person, the idea, be angry, be not angry. I'm not sure what is going to happen if I tap this, so I'm not going to tap it. So again, make sure you're kind of on the nose with your options. Make it very clear to your players what they're getting into. So, my key takeaways. 30 minutes to talk. who knows what you actually took from it. If you take nothing else, here are the 5 things I hope you keep in mind. Do not add branches to your story until it is a great story. Do not add choices until you have a great script. Every choice should have a very clear meaning, very clear goals, and very clear consequences. Make sure you've written immediate reactions and never negate a player's agency. I don't really have time for questions, but if people line up or show me if they want questions, I can always go to that writer follow-up reader room thing that's down the hall. We are hiring for people that love interactive fiction, so there's our hire link if you want. You can also email me. There's my email address. Thank you for listening to me talk for 30. I have more minutes. Oh, I have more minutes. I didn't know that. I thought it was Oh, that's great. My thing told me it took 30 minutes. It must have been running. Well, I kind of raced through stuff. So if anyone has questions, I can talk. There's mics here and there. As a quick reminder, please fill out the little survey they send you. I really want to know how I do. 2 mics. Grab a mic. I can talk about our process. I can dive deeper on questions. Hey, how's it going?
You skipped over a bunch of data slides?
I did skip over a bunch of data slides. Oh, no, I actually ended up working them in.
Okay.
So you saw them. Essentially, we see that no choices bad, tons of choices good, tons of choices not also good. There's a sweet step in there. And that people tend to not replay your game. Liam will have more data on that. But what actually makes them replay the most is a great story.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
So you suggest that you should make a great story first, then find branches for it. Does this risk having some scenario where the player thinks, oh, there's one correct story and then a bunch of branches that lead to wrong endings, and they're somehow less valid than the one true story? And like, how would you get around that?
Sure. We actually had a problem with that in one of our stories, specifically when we added premium choices, choices where players could pay to get kind of a cool side story. It made them feel like that was the right story. Generally, how we've worked around it is we actually make sure we do follow that kind of diamond structure, so that if they go online and they look things up, it feels like they're all seeing roughly the same experience. We also do a lot of play testing in-house, and we actually will ask our players to pick different choices at times. So especially internally, we'll be like, hey, you go play choosing A, B, A, B, and then tell us how you feel about the story. It is a lot of gut checks. We generally haven't, though, aside from when we make paid options, we haven't generally encountered that issue. I think it's because we do it before we move into scripting, so it's still a little flexible enough that if we like a branch more, we're still mushy enough with our story to be like, well, that one's so good. How do we make that one better? So we do it a little early enough that we can still futz with it. That kind of helps. Any other questions? You had a hand up. You should do that. I totally can. That's a totally valid question. There it is. Question.
Hello. What's the best way to prevent FOMO?
For your players? Man, that's a good question. We have a lot of community engagement. I found that Instagram has been a really great tool for us to help our players prevent FOMO. We'll also, in our account, we'll like put up little secret endings and be like, did you know how to get to this? Then if they didn't get to it, they want to, but also they get to see it. I haven't noticed it being, we do make replaying an option. So we do, with some of our especially branchy stories, like Demi gets a lot of replays. I think also because she has a lot of fans. Yeah, that's kind of, I think really your social media community is one of your best options to prevent a little bit of FOMO. But I also don't mind if there's a little bit of FOMO because I mean you did your job well, because they wanna read a good story. Yes?
Do you have any data regarding how arbitrary morality systems affect interactive narratives?
Not great data. We haven't done a lot with morality systems. In the Demi game, we did points. So that was where we balanced your fame, your, what was it? It was fame, love, and happiness? Friendship, something like that. It's not quite morality, it's a little similar. We found that, at least for our stories, they don't actually improve anything at all, any of our retention, any of our data. They don't hurt it either. So our current data has been that we don't use them unless it really helps the story, and if it helps the story, it doesn't hurt to put it in. But we haven't seen it drastically improve anything either.
All right.
Question.
Hello. Do you feel that part of the problem with replay value is that there's sites like YouTube where people can play through it once and then they'll go, okay, there's like 11 other endings, but I'm just going to go look up the endings and not play through it?
I don't know. I actually feel like YouTube is a response to the problem, but now I'm not talking with that. I'm just talking personally. I think it's that I don't want to go invest. Usually a replay I already know isn't going to be so different that it was worth the 20 or 40 or 60 hours of my time, just because I haven't seen any games that promote being that different. So I don't want to go replay a bunch of stuff I've already seen to see 5 things I didn't see. I'd rather go to YouTube and be like, yo, what happens if I go to Prince Charming's house instead? And then just watch that scene. So my hunch is it's the investment it takes. I'm actually going to go, I'm totally promoting another speaker, I'm going to try and go to the Life is Strange talk because I think it was a really interesting mechanic they used where you could just rewind in the moment and then watch what would have happened on your other branch. And I'm hoping they talk about that, and I'm curious to see how that affected their story.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So what is your target audience? It seems like you might have a strict scope there. So do you have adults or other kids?
Can you say the question again?
So your target audience who are actually reading your stories or playing the
Oh, who's our target audience?
Yeah.
Right now, we're predominantly women ages 13 to 25, and we're just kind of slowly expanding that vertical as we look at other stories.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you want to hop up to a mic? Or can I? I'll repeat your question. It's okay. It's all good. And then I'll hop over here.
I feel like there's a real lack of data in the industry about how players interact with story, and I think that your data is incredibly valuable, and that's why people are interested in it. So do you have any more data outside the context of this talk that is publicly available?
That is a great question, and when I get back, I will see if I can make some publicly available, because we have a ton of data that we look at what influences the choices people make, again, like seeing that yes, no, and maybe actually does generate bad response rates. So I will aim to make more available for sure.
If you can't make the data itself available, I would love to have more information on how you collect it as well.
Sure. Yeah. Do you want to hop up to a mic? Okay, great. Yes.
Hi, I was sort of curious about the replayability as well. Like personally for me, there's a lot of games I don't ever want to replay, but I love talking with other people about different things that happened because we made different choices. Like me and my boyfriend will play games explicitly setting out to make different choices and then either watch each other play or just talk about like completely wildly different scenarios. Do you see that in your data, like watching forums or something?
We do, yeah. So asking, like, do people share their information from their replay? Or from their replay, from their experiences, that sort of stuff, playing with each other. That's actually I'm glad you're asking something I didn't really talk about. It's a big reason why, even though we don't see branching really affecting replayability for us, we still think branching feels right, and it feels like a good thing to do. Because what we see is our players, I'm mostly looking at our Instagrams and our forum, which is where most of our players hang out. They are so excited to share when they've experienced a different scene. In the Demi story, we let you pick the gender of who you date, how you want to identify, who you want them to be, and they have a huge time talking about, oh, well, but if this character is a woman, do they act different? How does your scene go? So that's shown us that having at least some branching and some feeling that I have customized my story, that people seem to enjoy that. And we definitely see that our stories with more branching get more online engagement. So that for sure is true. Our single narrative stories get almost no online engagement whatsoever.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So basically, during your speech, you mentioned that having choices allows the player to personalize their experience, but they have to feel, impactful instead of being impactful for fear of, not just, potentially wrecking the story. Then you also mentioned how a story can serve as a great, a great base for, a malleable base for, putting choices as well as, branching paths and so on. So I would like to know, how do you maintain a balance between choices and a concrete story? Because, obviously you want to make sure that the choices are it's quality over quantity. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I think that it's a great question. So talking about how we balance the story with the choices and the branches. The biggest thing we do is we always have that outline that we did at the very start open. And if we feel like what we're writing is about to make us go back to an outline phase, if it is that big a change that we have to go reassess the outline, we'll actually as a whole team say, pause for a second. Is this choice worth it? Is this branch worth it? Do we love this choice enough that we are willing to go backwards in that little step of story, then branches, then script, then choice? And sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes, like with the Demi example I showed with your sister, we did go back and re-outline some stuff because we felt it was important. But generally, we always say if it's going to force us to go back a step, we won't do it. We'll find a different choice.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, that's my last one. Okay, I'm going to go into the wrap-up room. It's 3022.
No, it's like just around the corner.
It's just around the corner, apparently. So I'll talk to you guys there. Thanks so much.